Gale.
Here.
Guzekowski.
Here.
Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Item 3 is the approval of the minutes of March 1st, 2016.
Kavich will make a motion to approve the minutes of 3/1/16 as listed.
Guzekowski will second. Roll call.
Alderman Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Aye.
Tillman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
So item 4 is under recognition is a motion to approve the retirement of Police K-9 Bronco and concur with the transfer of ownership agreement, which conveys ownership of Bronco to Officer Michael Musa. How many years has he served, Chief?
10 years.
Wow, that's amazing. Is that the longest?
Yes, we kept him an extra year, had him evaluated by the doctor, and he was able to go longer than we normally would.
And how's he doing?
He's doing good. He's probably responsible for more searches, arrests, and apprehensions than any canine we've ever had. Very, very aggressive team. As the proclamation shows, they were the canine handler, or canine of the year in the state of Wisconsin. I believe it was 2010, which is pretty prestigious. So his official day of retirement is the 31st. We plan on having a ceremony at the police department for that, just as we would retire any officer, and we'll be putting something out for that.
Awesome. And we'll get a motion on that one, and then 5 will actually read the proclamation. So a motion is, I need a motion on 4.
Kirkowski will make a motion to approve the retirement of Police K-9 Bronco and concur with the transfer of ownership agreement, which conveys ownership of Bronco to Officer Michael Musa. Guzekowski will second.
Roll call.
Alderman Verhaelen.
Aye.
Tillman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
All right, so item 5 is the actual council proclamation. In 16-03, it recognizes the retirement of K-9 Bronco, the 6th police service K-9 for the city of Oak Creek. City clerk will read that proclamation.
Council Proclamation 16-03, retirement of K-9 Bronco, 6th Police Service K-9 for the city of Oak Creek. Whereas Officer Michael Musa was chosen to become a K-9 handler and was sent for training introduction to dual-purpose K-9 Bronco in April of 2006. And whereas Officer Michael Musa and K-9 Bronco returned in May of 2006 and began their tour with the Oak Creek Police Department. And whereas Officer Michael Musa and K-9 Bronco have responded from home on a moment's notice to calls for police service. And whereas during the course of their service to the city of Oak Creek, the team was responsible for numerous apprehensions and the finding of tens of thousands of dollars worth of narcotics. And whereas during Bronco's service to the Oak Creek Police Department, he was an integral member of the emergency response unit, having been sent into many buildings to clear areas and making them safe prior to the officers entering those buildings. And whereas Officer Michael Musa was named K-9 Handler of the Year by the Wisconsin Law Enforcement K-9 Handlers Association in 2010. Now therefore, we acknowledge this highly effective team and honorably discharge K-9 Bronco from service effective at the end of his work shift on March 31st, 2016. Passed and adopted this 15th day of March 2016.
Thank you very much. And as the chief said, very distinguished service. And we miss him, but we get a new K-9 in the process, so exciting.
Yeah, and I just like to, we get a lot of questions, what, the next canine. This canine that we're getting to replace Bronco is, we didn't have to fund it through the city this year. We obtained a private donor whose wife was very fond of canines, and when she passed, she left an endowment to fund canines throughout Milwaukee metropolitan area and have funded many canines. And all they ask is that we put on our squad car in memory of her. So our next canine is fully paid for and funded through a private donor.
Very nice. All right, so I need a motion on 5.
Kavich will make a motion to adopt proclamation number 1603, recognizing the retirement of K-9 Bronco, the 6th Police Service K-9 for the city of Oak Creek. Guzekowski will second.
I heard Guzekowski second. Roll call.
Alderman Tillman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Aye.
Item 6 is a council proclamation number 16-04. It's a congratulations to All Saints Lutheran Church on their 50th anniversary. I'm not going to read it. I'm going to be at the event, and I'll read it in person. I think it's at the end of this month, or early April. April? Okay, and I will be in attendance. So just need a motion on 6, and then we'll read the proclamation at the event.
Gail, move to approve Council Proclamation 16-04. Congratulations to All Saints Lutheran Church on their 50th anniversary.
Guzekowski, I'll second.
Roll call.
Alderman Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Aye.
Tillman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye.
All right, so I was just asking the question there. So we're going to move to public hearings. Item 7 is a request by the City of Oak Creek to rezone a portion of the property at 7600 South Sixth Street from M1 Manufacturing to B2 Community Business, and to amend the legal description section of the existing conditional use permit affecting the property at 600 West Drexel Avenue to include the rezoned portion of 7600 South Sixth Street in the First District. City Clerk will read that notice.
Public hearing number 1 is to consider a request by the City of Oak Creek to rezone a portion of the property at 7600 South Sixth Street from M1 Manufacturing to B2 Community Business, and to amend the legal description section of the existing conditional use permit affecting the property at 600 West Drexel Avenue to include the rezoned portion of 7600 South Sixth Street. Applicant is City of Oak Creek, property owner, City of Oak Creek, and Langtow Real Estate LLC. There follows the legal description. Date of notice is February 18th, 2016.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Doug Seymour. I am the Director of Community Development for the City of Oak Creek, and this is a public hearing and a request to rezone a portion of the property at 7600 South Sixth Street from M1 Manufacturing to B2 Community Business, and to amend the legal description in the conditional use permit at 600 West Drexel to include this rezoned property. The council members may recall that this property, 600 West Drexel, was rezoned to B2 Community Business with a conditional use for a restaurant, the drive-through facility. That was in February of this year. And at that time, staff was engaged with the applicant and the property owner, discussions relative to the acquisition of a portion of the adjacent city-owned property that would provide the city with additional right-of-way for both Drexel Avenue and for South Sixth Street, while at the same time would potentially improve the site planning for the restaurant and drive-through by providing some additional space for the property, as well as giving some additional clearances for some of the intersections on Drexel Avenue and Sixth Street. So, working with the applicant, the owner, who I must say has been very gracious throughout this process, appreciate that very much. We were able to come to a transfer agreement, which would, and that's coming up before you as a separate agenda item, but the land that is being transferred would still remain zoned M1. So what this action does is it takes that land that's being transferred, changes it to that B2 community business, and really adds that to the conditional use permit for the restaurant and drive-through at 600 West Drexel Avenue. This is a public hearing. I would ask that anyone has any questions or comments regarding the proposed rezoning of the property at 7600 South Sixth Street to fill out a form, appearance form, submit that to the city clerk, and when called, please proceed to the microphone, give your name, address, and proceed to address your comments to the common council. Thank you.
I'll make 3 calls. First call for public comment on that item. Second call. Yes, sir, Mr. Degner. Can you pull the mic down and before you speak? Thank you, sir.
Arden Degner, 8540 South Pennsylvania Avenue. I believe this also pertains to item number 16 and 17, doesn't
Yep.
it? We're
Yes,
going to
sir.
exchange the
Yes, sir.
lands.
Yep.
And the part that is incomprehensible to my thinking is the fact that you are giving this land, allowing for installation of a sidewalk, but not requiring it. Here we are, right across the street from Drexel Town Square, and you're not going to provide any sidewalk access to this business? To me, this is unbelievable that in the middle of an urban area where you don't require sidewalks.
Thank you, sir. Third and final call on that item. Seeing no more public comment, we are going to jump to item 16, which is a consideration of resolution number 11685. That's 031516. It approves the exchange of a portion of the city-owned land at 7600 South Sixth Street with portions of 600 West Drexel Avenue in the First District. Any discussion or questions? Go ahead, city attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. You have in front of you tonight, council members, an updated exchange agreement. This relates to some revisions based upon a review by council on the other side of this transaction. Basically, some cleanup as it relates to Articles 4 and 5 related to title. All of them are acceptable in my view. I've had time to review them, and this would be the anticipated final agreement that you would be approving tonight. This allows for that exchange of the land as evidenced in the exhibits that you had earlier that accompanied your council packet.
Okay. Any other questions? Just need a motion.
Kirkowski will make a motion to adopt resolution number 11685-031516, approving the exchange of a portion of the city-owned land at 7600 South 6th Street with portions of 600 West Drexel Avenue.
Guzekowski, second. Roll call.
Alderman Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Aye.
Tolman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
And item 17 is a consideration of resolution number 11686-031516. It approves a certified survey map for the property at 7600 South 6th Street and 600 West Drexel Avenue in the First District. Doug?
Thank you. Essentially, what this does, it takes the land that was just involved in the land exchange that the council just authorized, and it makes it part of the property at 600 West Drexel Avenue.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Jerry,
ahead.
it might be useful for the audience just to describe why, in fact, the city's exchanging this land on this particular property, just to give people a idea behind that.
If the council will recall, I think when this item came up, there was some suggestion that it made sense to get some additional right-of-way at that key intersection, 6th Street and Drexel Avenue.
For what, Jerry?
For
Potential
turning-
sidewalks?
for sidewalks, turning movements, that type of thing. So we engaged, as Doug indicated, with property owner who has been gracious about this and sought additional property for those uses. We think that there's also a benefit in that the driveway for this business actually ends up further west, getting away from the intersection. You want to move that as far as you can. Getting too close to the intersection, as we've seen, is no longer a good thing. So this, I think, came up as a suggestion. I think it was Alderman Verhaelen did it. We followed up, thought it was a good idea, and we had a willing party on the other side, and I think this worked out beneficially to both parties.
Thank you.
Anything else? Motion.
Kirkowski will make a motion. Council adopt resolution number 11686-031516, approving a certified survey map for the property at 7600 South 6th Street and 600 West Drexel Avenue.
Bekavich will second.
Roll call.
Alderman Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Aye.
Tolman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye. All right. So we're jumping back to 8. Why didn't we just put these in order in the first place? All right. Challenging me? Is that what you're doing? All right. Item 8 is a consideration of ordinance number 2793, approving the rezoning of a portion of the property at 7600 South 6th Street from M1 Manufacturing to B2 Community Business, and that the legal description in section 1 of the conditional use permit for 600 West Drexel is amended to include the rezoned property in the First District.
As we had discussed earlier, the property which is the subject of this public hearing, or the previous public hearing, is the lands that were just exchanged between the city of Elk Creek and the property at 600 West Drexel Avenue. It takes those lands, which are currently zoned M1 Manufacturing, changes those to B2 Community Business, and assigns the conditional use permit for the drive-through to that portion of the property as well, so that the entire property now will have one consistent zoning classification.
Makes sense? Questions? Motion.
Kirkowski will make a motion that council adopt ordinance number 2793, approving the rezoning of a portion of the property at 7600 South 6th Street from M1 Manufacturing to B2 Community Business, and that the legal description in section 1 of the conditional use permit for 600 West Drexel is amended to include the rezoned property.
Bekavich will second.
Roll call.
Alderman Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Aye.
Tolman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
All right, item 9 is a consideration of a request by the City of Oak Creek to rezone the properties at 709, 725 East Oak Street, 7312 South 27th Street, 7951, 8067, 8210, 8245, 8290, 8310, 8351 South 20th Street, 1741, 1901, 2211, 2305, 2319, and 2361 West Drexel Avenue, excluding C1 Shoreland Wetland Conservancy, FW Floodway, and flood fringe districts to P1 Park District in the first district. City Clerk will read that notice.
Public hearing number 2 is to consider a request by the City of Oak Creek to rezone the properties at 709 and 725 East Oak Street, 7312 South 27th Street, 7951, 8067, 8210, 8245, 8290, 8310, 8351 South 20th Street, 1741, 1901, 2211, 2305, 2319, and 2361 West Drexel Avenue, excluding C1 Shoreland Wetland Conservancy, floodway, and flood fringe districts to P1 Park District. Applicant is City of Oak Creek. Property owner is Milwaukee County. Date of notice is February 18th, 2016.
Thank you. Milwaukee County owns obviously a lot of parkland in the city of Oak Creek, although not all of the parkland to this point actually had been zoned parks. I mean, a good case in point was the lands within and adjacent to Falk Park that were involved in the recent land exchange between the city and Northwestern Mutual. Many of those parcels retained their current zoning, which was in many cases residential. So at the request of the county and working with the county and the county executive, not only Oak Creek, but many different municipalities were asked to change and make sure that the county parklands obviously are zoned parkland. And certainly a request that makes sense and the city was happy to oblige with. But what this does, again, it takes those lands and right now the two kind of subgroupings that are before you are those lands adjacent to in the vicinity of Falk Park as identified by the red crosshatch on the exhibit on the screen, as well as there are some lands in the vicinity of the dog park, which also would be changed to P1 Park as part of this zoning change request. Certainly, the lands were intended to be used for parks. There was never any suggestion that they not be used for parks. So this really just codifies that the use of these properties would be consistent with the proposed zoning. And I know that a representative of the county was scheduled to be here this evening.
He is here.
Oh, John is here. I'll let Mr. Darrell speak to that then.
Come on up. Welcome.
I apologize for being late. I'm wowed by your facilities here. I was at the older location, but I think the county executive and Parks Department, as well as the Board of Supervisors, are committed to make these adjustments throughout our system to get our parks zoned parks throughout Milwaukee County. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any questions? Go
I
ahead.
have a question.
Hold on one second. Alderman Gale, then Alderman Verhaelen.
Just make sure you introduce yourself. So
Oh, yes, sir. John Dargle, I'm the Milwaukee County Parks Director with Milwaukee County.
Alderman Verhaelen.
One question. This, I imagine, has something to do with the county board passing the requirement that no county lands could be sold if they were zoned for park purposes.
That's correct.
We're going on. Well, my question is, as we've just seen with a little piece of land at the city of Oak Creek on here, outlot or whatever, does this preclude the city from the city or any other city or municipality from making any deals with the county where we may need, say, a portion of an outlot or something for access or something like that? Does it preclude us from being able to purchase any of that property, or how does this work? I mean, is it an all-encompassing thing where if we pass this, all this land becomes unavailable for any type of sale?
No, that's not true. It would just have to be brought to the Board of Supervisors for their decision versus the way the state statute is written, where for other lands other than parkland, where the county executive has that authority, we would obviously bring those items, as you suggested, to the Board of Supervisors for their approval. So it doesn't preclude it from happening. It's just, there's a process that we take through the
It seems to me
board.
that puts a kind of an unnecessary stumbling block, and I don't know if everyone's done their due diligence on this thing, but I'd hate to see, the county and all the municipalities jump into something like this, and then all of a sudden down the road, you're facing situations like I just said, where everything's got to go back to the county board, because county executive's unable to do anything. Your hands are basically tied, and I'm just kind of putting out scenarios there, but I'm just kind of wondering what would happen,
I just think it's just a steps and process, legislative process that we'd have to go through with that. So I don't think it's off the table. I think the conversations and dialogue can continue to happen. It's that the board now has the authority to make those decisions, a final decision on that, with obviously the county executive's approval.
The clerk I was talking to the clerk, when Mark, 7:18 is the start of the public hearing. That was first call. So Doug Seymour wanted to make a comment.
Thank you. Just in response to that, I mean, many of these properties, especially in the vicinity of Falk Park, are part of the exchange agreement, which was enacted through a law-con transfer. So in most cases in Falk Park, it's a long, involved process if the city or anyone else were to propose an exchange. So I think that's a good point well taken, especially with respect to some non-lock-on properties. But I mean, it's the city ultimately retains control over the zoning of these properties. That is a municipal function zoning. So, I mean, for instance, the city could, going through a due process, apply to rezone these properties at any point in time. I just don't know that there'd be any reason to do so.
Okay. I'm going to make second call. Come on up. Thank you, Director Dargle. Yeah, come on up. Name and address for the record.
Frank Petrolesek, 611 East Oak Street. Excuse me. On regards to this here rezoning for the dog park, that was voted on 10 years ago, and it was passed. And there was 4 lots that were rezoned. Should I read all the 4 numbers?
If you have them in front of you, sure.
Yeah. Key number is 7339999, 73017, 70999-01, 7329996-002. That was voted on back in 2005.
Are you talking about the creation of the dog park?
Excuse me?
Are you talking about the creation of the
for the dog park, and it was all approved.
Yeah.
And there was a whole list of different meetings.
I think-
You got a list of all the
Yep,
stuff.
I have it. We're putting it in the record. Doug has an
there's-
answer for you.
And there's maps and everything.
Go ahead.
Well, the dog park may have been created for those parcels. Not all of those parcels were actually zoned P1 park. I mean, many may have been zoned A.
They were
I don't know the
zoned
specifics, but
M1.
Right. So this changes the zoning of those parcels which weren't already zoned P1 park to P1 park.
It zones them correctly.
Excuse me?
It zones them correctly.
So why was we having another meeting?
Because what we found out as part of this process is these parcels, these many scattered small parcels, were not zoned correctly however many years ago. So we're realigning them so that they actually are zoned the way they should be zoned.
Okay, what you got on up there in red, that's not what it was zoned on before, the layout, according to print.
Again, this does not represent the entire dog park parcels. These are the parcels that are being used for the dog park, but which are not zone P1. So the result of this action is that anything that's a park, Milwaukee County Park, will have park zoning.
Just essentially classifies them correctly.
It was back in '05 with everyone.
They weren't. That's the issue we're dealing with. But thanks for bringing that forward. Thanks for your comments. All right, third and final call on this item, item 9. All right, I'll close the public hearing at this time. We'll move to item 10, which is a consideration of ordinance number 2794, approving the rezoning of the properties at 709 and 725 East Oak Street, 7312 South 27th Street, 7951 8067, 8210, 8245, 8290, 8351 South 20th Street, 1741, 1901, 2211, 2305, 2319, and 2361 West Drexel Avenue, excluding C1 Shoreland Wetland Conservancy, floodway and flood fringe districts to P1 Park District in the first district. Questions from the council? Seeing none, motion on 10.
David will make a motion to adopt ordinance number 2794, approving a rezoning of the properties at 709 and 725 East Oak Street, 7312 South 27th Street, 7951, 8067, 8210, 8245, 8290, 8351 South 20th Street, 1741, 1901, 2211, 2305, 2319, and 2361 West Drexel Avenue, excluding C1 Shoreland Wetland Conservancy, FW Floodway, and FF Flood Fringe Districts to P1 Park District.
Kirkowski will second.
Roll call.
Alderman Verhaelen.
Aye.
Toman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
Under new business, item 11 is a motion to authorize the city to retain the professional services of Caprilli Marketing Design in an amount up to $7,500 for the design, production, and distribution of 3 32-page at the minimum magazines in 2016, subject to the city attorney and city administrator approvals of a written agreement. We have Leslie Finn from our staff to give us a little background on this.
Leslie Flynn, Communication Coordinator for the City of Oak Creek. I passed out a sample copy of the magazine to the aldermen, so you can kind of see what we're talking about. As a city with a lot going on, we are always looking for ways to tell our story and expand the reach of our communication efforts with residents and businesses. And we currently do this in a number of ways. The Acorn and other targeted direct mailings, our website and social media, currently the new digital displays that you see throughout the building, to name a few. Last year we explored the idea of producing a 4-page direct mail newsletter that would contain probably one in-depth article per newsletter highlighting a specific city project or service. It would also have included a community calendar, elected official contact information, and other short articles as well. The cost to print and mail this four-page proposed newsletter to all the residents and businesses was close to $5,000 per issue. When Caprill Marketing approached the city, the school district, and MATC about collaborating on a community magazine, we realized that we could get more content for a smaller investment from the city. This would be about 5 to 6 pages of content per issue, which translates to about 4 or 5 articles, plus calendar listings. And this would cost the city $2,500 per issue, so half the cost of that much smaller 4-page newsletter. So the proposed publication schedule for this year, that's before you, is three issues, which would be in June, September, and December. That's the proposed schedule. The content for this magazine would be coordinated by an established magazine advisory committee, but determined by each individual shareholder, which means we would welcome content ideas from you if you have them. Just another item to note is that our current print piece, the Acorn, would remain, continue to be published because it basically has a different set of information that is still valuable to the residents. So this would be in addition.
Okay, and I don't know if it's in the report or not, but we have some tremendous partners on this project, which include Oak Creek School District, MATC, Wisp Park, Wired, Barrett Visionary. I think the end result of this is we can reach every residence, every business in the city 3 times a year, 4 times a year if we continue the effort next year with information about what's happening, which is the number one thing that people say to us, well, I didn't know that was going on. So each of those entities during the year can tell the story of what they're working on, whether it's something happening in the school district with their new schools or in the city with our rollout of all of our new parks next year. We can all tell that story so that every resident and business can understand what we're working on. City Administrator.
I think an important point for this too is the quality of the magazine is intended to be something that's retained by the homeowners and businesses. It would be a coffee table type magazine that you would expect that would come in the mail and would stay around for a bit. So we would be able to look at the content from between articles, and it would be something that you wouldn't toss. It allows some advertising. We have had a number of the entities at DTS and other places look for direct advertising that also has information about the city. So I think a really effective way, a very affordable way for us to be able to hit the community with information out there. I think that there's a gap in information that's coming in print right now. Not everybody's on social media, the website. The Acorn does a good job for what it is, but it really doesn't have the ability to do some of the more feature articles, pushing information out that we'd like to. We think this is a pretty good format for it.
So questions from the council, comments?
One question.
I'll get to Alderman Kirkowski first.
Jerry or Leslie, if the, it's going to go to all the residents, what about businesses? Would they have to?
Yes, they will
Yes,
also.
they're
receive
included.
All of them, yes.
I think there's 16 to 20,000 copies we're going to have direct mail to everybody, and then we'll have some extra copies that'll go in the different sponsors out here that they can pass out, front counter, that kind of thing as well.
Available at the library also?
Yes.
Yeah, wherever we want to put them, yeah.
There's 18,000 that will be printed and about 16,000 mailed.
Excellent.
I still got another question.
Go ahead. And then Mr. Alderman Verhaelen, then Mr. Degner.
My question, I guess, goes to monitoring the success or the usefulness of this. We're going to do this for 3 issues this year, and I was wondering if there's going to be any way we can follow up to see if, in fact, if it was a good investment and people really like to see this thing and want it to continue. And I was wondering if there's going to be a way to track that at the end of the year.
I would say the way we can answer that is we have one of the most robust social media platforms in the state. I think we're 3rd or 4th now as among cities of all sizes. So I would say we probably would ask our followers and our residents to give us their input on what they think the magazine did or didn't do. And then we'll bring it back to council in January, February of next year to reassess.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. So at least we know we're spending money, it's well spent, and we can continue.
Yep, I agree.
And just as a comment on that, I would certainly encourage all the aldermen, to ask folks out there, what kind of impact that has. It's a different format than the Acorn is. Again, we think it's going to be talk with folks and see whether after the first couple of issues that you're finding that if we need to make adjustments, make sure we're hearing that. But the intention would be to do these on an annual basis, so we have a point towards the end of the year that we can decide whether we want to continue it or not. And I think that works well for that yearly commitment and review.
Yeah, and from what I understand, there's a committee that will review the submissions and the policies and, okay.
Yeah, there will be, for each shareholder, each stakeholder, there will be committee members assigned, and then we will determine the content.
Excellent. I think it's an innovative way to communicate with your residents and businesses, and we haven't done it before. It's not done in a lot of places. I think we continue to try to find ways to innovate and lead, and this is another one of those opportunities. Mr. Degner.
Arden Degner, 8540 South Pennsylvania Avenue. What is the cost of the Acorn presently? You have any idea?
Yeah, I would say that the issues between the printing and the mailing are probably $6,000-$7,000 per issue.
It's an expensive platform. It does reach a lot of people. It's actively used by people that use the recreational services. It provides detail for all those programs that we couldn't provide in this format.
And I would also indicate it does the things in terms of put your garbage out on a certain day, make sure you check the batteries, which is really not the kind in your fire alarm, which is not the content that we're looking for this. It's looking to be more feature type rather than, the rules, the regulations, sign up for the recreation programs. So it's a different format.
So then, how will the poor residents in the city that have to defray this cost, get that kind of information then. Because you just mentioned the fact that the internet is not available to everybody, and this will be available to everybody. Yet, apparently, it's going to be a PR thing for the. How then will the individuals in the city get this kind of information that you're going to leave out?
It'll come in the mail.
Oh, you're still going to do another mailing.
The acorn's still gonna happen.
Yeah, we're not getting rid of the acorn.
The acorn's still gonna happen.
These are two
Is
different,
Acre still going to happen?
yes. It serves a specific purpose.
Well, this reminds me of the 23-page glossy brochure that South Milwaukee. It sounds like it's a copy of that type, and it's. To me, it's filled with nothing but advertisements trying to get your attention. And to me, we don't need this kind of, particularly with this other item that's listed on the addendum for Cobalt $13,000. How can we afford all this throwing money away? The last time we had Cobalt here, they said that the community center, the people didn't want it. Did you pay any attention to it? No! In other words, it's a waste of money, and we can't afford this kind of waste of tax money.
Thank you, Mr. Degner.
Especially if you're going to have the acorn in addition to all this. Let the individuals that run the businesses, if they can afford $600, let them pay for this entire new budget.
Thank you, sir. Any questions?
Yeah.
Alderman, hold on one second. Alderman Guzikowski.
I'm just one couple things. As the first issue goes out, will there be some type of introductory letter inside of it saying, hey, this is what it's about, and looking for feedback type of thing?
Imagine
You're
that
welcome.
would be part of the publication.
I would think each of the partners would probably contribute something that would say, hey, welcome to this new platform, and this is what this is our attempt and how we're gonna use it.
And I think as far as the advertising goes, I think it's an opportunity for new businesses that are coming to the city to showcase and let them show them on the pages, in print. Here, come and stop by. So I think this is a good tool, so I appreciate the efforts.
Okay. All right, Alderman Bekavich.
I have to disagree. I actually think it's a pretty neat idea. I think it's a good format. I like the collaboration on the partners between the school district, MATC, West Park, and the fact that the advertising cost will cover $8,500 to $9,500 of the anticipated cost. This is a benefit not only to the businesses in Oak Creek that can advertise and drive people to it, but believe it or not, we have residents on the northwest side of town that maybe have never visited the southeast to get to La Sousa's restaurant and things like that, because they may not know about it, things of that nature. So I think this is a good driver. It'll advertise the things we have going at Drexel Town Square, Lake Vista, and as the city grows, it's really going to keep people up to date. I think it's a pretty neat idea. So I'm all in.
Any other comments or questions? Again, it's a 3-issue test, so we'll reevaluate at the beginning of next year, and we'll see how it worked and what didn't work, and we can either make it better or move in a different direction. Seeing no more questions or comments, motion on 11.
Gail move to authorize the city to retain the professional services of Caprilli Marketing Design in the amount of up to $7,500 for the design, production, and distribution of 3 32-page magazines in 2016, subject to the city attorney and city administrator approvals of written agreement.
Guzikowski, second.
Want me to add that language? 7,500 minimum?
It was a 32-page minimum magazine.
Oh, okay, minimum to that length of it.
So in order.
All right, roll call. Do we get a second? Who was the second?
Guzikowski?
All right,
I had one question.
Go ahead.
Is that a hotel tax funded entity? Or?
Not as it's currently budgeted, no.
Wouldn't that fall under that category?
I think it would fall under the category for this year, potentially, because you could not use tourism dollars for that, and then the portion which collected exclusively for the Tourism Commission. But I mean, obviously there's hotel revenues that are directed towards the CDA, and if that's certainly a logical place for those if the council wants to take them out of that Fund 31.
That's a good question. Okay.
Cover that later.
Yeah, okay. Roll call?
Alderman Toman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Aye.
Thank you. Where'd you go? There you go. Thank you. Item 12 is a consideration of a lease agreement with Primeco Personal Communications, limited partnership Verizon Wireless for placement of communications antenna facilities on a city-owned monopole located at 255 East Centennial Drive. City Administrator.
I'll start out the meeting in saying that this isn't ripe for a vote for the council tonight, but I think for your input it is. We are still working out the details of the lease agreement with Verizon. We've been at this with the school district's attorneys, our attorneys, Verizon attorneys for probably 8 weeks. We had our most recent discussions and redlining of our agreement with them last week. We haven't heard from them in terms of the response, but you can basically get from the agreement in front of you the direction that we're going in on this. I'll give a little bit of background. There's a communication tower clearly that is on the old fire station number 1 site that's owned by the school district now. That cell tower is in the way of some of the preferred building plans for the school district. They had some options of potentially moving the cell tower or eliminating it at that site if they could get the concurrence of one of the 2 occupants of that tower. One of the lessees, the school district has the ability to terminate that lease. They've exercised that termination, that's T-Mobile, and they need to remove their materials from that site. We're in discussions with T-Mobile to move their equipment to our communications tower on Centennial Drive. So that is, they have no rights to stay there. So the district has terminated that. Verizon has continuing rights on that tower, and should they choose to, they don't need to move, which would mean that tower remains at its current location. There's been some thought that it doesn't make sense to have those 2 towers as close together as they are, and if there's a way to be able to work with Verizon to move them to a new site, then we'd bring that to the city council for their consideration. Essentially, Verizon has taken the position that they don't want any upfront cost to be able to move their communications facilities to a new location. That is not the way they want to tie up capital. I'm not sure if any of you were around when the original lease was done, but that's the way the original lease was structured, that there was basically a 10-year forgiveness on the lease payments so that the tower could be put up and then paid for through that process. Verizon put the tower up and was dedicated to the city after a period of time. So key points in the agreement that you have in front of you and from a financial basis are we're looking, and we haven't gotten agreement on this yet, we're looking to have a firm price for what the cost of moving the antennas and purchasing the new antennas would be, and the agreement has a $250,000 escrow arrangement in it for that cost. The school district is going to have some costs to remove the tower and remove some of the bases. They've requested $64,000 for those costs as well. The city has the potential to finance those costs in the state revolving loan fund, would be where we would recommend that happen from. We have some additional costs for a building that we'd like to construct at the base of the tower. We'd prefer the various vendors not to build, because they've talked about building metal sheds or putting in a cyclone fence, which we don't think is appropriate for the fire station site. We think a building that matches the architecture in the brick that's out there makes more sense, and we'd like to house a single building. We eventually have three leases that we can have. We'd like all of those tenants to be in the same structure. There's been recent discussion as recently as today that they don't want an enclosed building because they really don't want to pay the air conditioning cost for the equipment. So it may be a building that has three sides that reduces the cost on it. Apparently the equipment has some ability to be outside. We're still in those discussions with T-Mobile that started today. So you've got fairly extensive lease agreement that's had input from us and Verizon in it. It follows negotiations that the school district had with Verizon that had actually increased some of the lease payments, and we're building on those increases and have potentially a 20-year agreement here, 10 years that are firm, 2 5-year terms that potentially can get extended. At any time, Verizon can dismiss themselves from this lease. We think there's not a great chance of that, but the market changes constantly, and that's a potential risk in terms of the revenue source over a 20-year period. I think I'll stop there because there's maybe a lot of questions that are out there. We'd like some feedback from the council. Oh, 2 more points. Time is critical. So from the school district's standpoint, they need an approved signed agreement by no later than our next meeting, which is the 4th of April. And then there's a second step that the tower has to be ready to go and all of the equipment moved by September 30th? September 30th. So that's a second step. And there are some approvals that may be needed in terms of historic preservation and so forth. We're not entirely sure that those are needed. They weren't needed as part of our approvals. Verizon, I think, has some suggestions that perhaps they may be needed. I think I'll stop there because I'm probably confused.
So here's what I would suggest, and because if it was just us, I would say let's wait till April 4th or whenever our next meeting in April is. We have a joint relationship here with the school district trying to go from 2 towers in the city to 1 tower. They have to realize that we want a cooperative agreement with both them and Verizon. To put it off till April 4th puts them in limbo, essentially for 2 more weeks. I think we should be able to at least adopt a agreement in principle or a memorandum of understanding tonight that says we are willing to go forward pending the final details, which we will approve on the April 4th meeting. That would be my recommendation. It gives them some peace of mind because otherwise they're hanging there for 2 weeks. And this is a key decision for them based on what they have to do with their building. If they don't know what's going to happen with that tower, it changes the dynamics of their architecture and all the other things that go into building a big building. So I think we at least, if we're going down this path, we need to at least work with them in that way.
And I think that certainly can happen. The council should weigh in on the principal deal terms, in terms of your comfort level with what we're trying to negotiate in terms of the agreement. And again, we haven't gotten a response to the limitation at this point. We're thinking we may get that as late as today. It hasn't arrived yet. And that's not anybody dragging their feet. That's just part of the process with the agreements heading back and forth between the parties.
Mayor, I just want
Go ahead.
to echo your thoughts. I mean, as a council, and I think as a city, we'd like to cooperatively work with the school district, obviously from an aesthetic standpoint, having one kind of this structure in our downtown area, I think would be optimal.
You don't have to drive around the city much to realize the impact of having that tower stay where it is. The one that we've built at the new fire station number 1, is tucked into the location. It's actually really hard to see anywhere else in the city. The one that's sitting right in the path of their new building, at least part of their new building, is now an eyesore. And it'll continue to be an eyesore until it's removed. So for that reason, whether it's a separate entity of the school district or us, I think it's something from a community perspective that's important that we commit to. And that would be my take.
I don't think there's, I don't anticipate there's a whole lot of controversy with the fact that ideally that tower. The trick is to working cooperatively with the school district to make sure there's terms that are mutually beneficial to the city and to the school district in terms of costs. There's a couple items obviously in the agreement that's tentatively posed in front of us that, raise some risks that we have to fairly consider for our citizenry. The fact that the initial term is only guaranteed for 5 years is, so you don't get to a break-even point on the initial, at least the initial guaranteed term is something we need to look a little harder at. Cost in terms of taking the old tower out is another one we need to probably consider a little more fully, but those I think are items we can broach and deal with as we move forward. But I'm not opposed to finding some kind of way to move forward in terms of a memorandum of understanding here, given the time frame. So assuming the staff can get that under control, I'm good with that.
Anybody on that side? Alderman Bekavich?
No, I agree. I don't think there's an argument that we should work together with the school board, but there's a lot of unanswered questions here and what the risk and reward is going to be for the city. Just looking at the numbers and the financial impact, you're looking at $314,000 with an additional cost for cabling, equipment, be $100,000 or less, with a total reward of 1.2 mil on completion of the lease. You have to question if they can opt out of the lease at any time. We don't have much protection on that, so we may never see that 1.2.
Well, if they did opt out of it, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but if they did opt out of it, we'd also have the ability to lease it to somebody else.
True, but we got a lot of money stuck into it for for a problem that we really didn't create.
Right, I get it.
So again, I'm not against moving forward with some kind of understanding, but I don't think I'd want to plug hard numbers into it. And I guess I'd want clarification from the city attorney as to the best way to keep this moving forward while negotiations are going on.
And with that, we'll hand it to the city attorney.
Alderman Vukajewicz, I would say that, somewhat echoing what's already been said, I think the bottom line is because of the time frame and frankly, staff with the school district at the helm, this has been I think fair to say, concerted effort. A lot of pieces are dependent on the time frame. So my recommendation would be in terms of tonight, at least in terms of crafting and getting to a final agreement, I think that it's fair to say two things. One, there's a good deal of progress that's been made in terms of financial terms in general, that being lease payments, rent escalator, pieces of that nature. So it would seem that we would be able to then tonight have some number, figure, range, or cap as to a financial outlay that the council would be willing to authorize, at least at this point, in terms of going back to Verizon to say, for what's encapsulated in terms of the decommissioning of the site, frankly, which they're asking for that upfront outlay from the city, as it were, because this lease would be transferred to the city instead of the school district. I think that that's the critical piece, at least for the council, in terms of a final agreement coming back with every piece laid out for you on the 4th. I think that that's certainly possible, but I think that a number, what are you willing to put out there? I think there's a couple of pieces. I don't have the technical expertise that Caesar or Jerry might, but as it relates to some of the elements in the lease that's before you, there's a building and an equipment pad that would need to be constructed. Part of what we're proposing to Verizon is that we would construct that because we would want that anyway, that being the equipment pad, that being the building. Conceptually, if there are going to be other users on this monopole, that would be something that we would maintain as well. So sort of setting that aside from that number, but I'm pointing out, I think you had referenced some other costs up front. As far as other cabling and pieces of that nature, we would ask them to run their own cable, but I would believe that there's going to be this lump sum figure as it relates to getting them up and running, taking everything down on the current monopole, the old tower, so to speak, at the school district site, getting them up and running at the new site. I think that's what would help to move things forward, to give the direction to the school district and give the direction to us with Verizon.
City Administrator.
I think it's fair to say that our red line back on this are trying to make sure we know what all of our costs are. I would say that we had relatively open-ended costs and saying the city will just, pay whatever the costs are to move. We didn't like that approach. We didn't think you'd like that very much. So we're working towards trying to understand what those limitations are. And I'm not sure that this is a good approach for the city, but there is an alternative where we can cash out. There are companies that buy the leases, and you can cash out and get upfront cash that's at about 50% of the lease terms, where you get that upfront, you have the money. And there's companies out there, I've spoken to one within the last 2 or 3 weeks. They've got standard agreements for that, and they do that for communities that want to cash out lease terms that may or may not make their way to fruition if that's an issue. In this case, you'd be $600,000 plus. You'd be able to cash out a lease term, and you'd be able to pay for this and have a few dollars left. You'd be leaving, $600,000 potentially on the table. Just as an option, those programs are out there.
So for the city attorney, since you've been involved in these discussions, what kind of number are we looking at that perhaps we could insert into the language of a lease and agreement in principle?
$250,000 is what we had estimated, and that's certainly, I think, a fair number for our discussions in terms of the decommissioning of the site and then the relocating at the new site. That's separate from the $64,000 for your consideration. That would be the cost to the school district.
Melissa, just to clarify for me, on the back page of our staff memo, I pegged the potential all-in cost at $471,000. I know we've targeted a $250,000 number that is the escrow deposit, but fiscal impact on the back page, says could amount to $314,000 plus $100,000 or less for a building, and plus the $64,000 for relocation. So I think our all-in cost is looking somewhere $470 to $500. And I think we need to firm that around. We've got a below market leasing arrangement here we're looking at to begin with, and not a guarantee on the front end from a break-even standpoint. So those are kind of things we got to wrestle with a little harder in terms of making sure it's palatable to the council.
And carving out, to be clear, yes, that $250,000 would be for basically the decommissioning, relocating. Then there's a payment to the school district for their efforts in needing to do what they need to do. And then in addition to that, that's the $100,000 in terms of the building, the equipment pad, additional cabling, and other equipment. So.
Can I just say I'm not in favor of this right now? And here's where I stand. Back in 2012, when the school district took ownership of the property, that tower was there. We built a tower over behind a fire station. Couldn't we have discussed, how did we get here? Couldn't we have discussed that at the time, that maybe they weren't interested in it? But now that it's not working in the plans, and I don't want it in the middle of the school either, but now it's on our dime. How are we gonna foot the bill for this when this should have been thought of a little earlier? I guess I just don't understand how we got here without thinking this whole thing through.
And before anybody answers that, Chris, I want to say you kind of stole my thunder a little bit. When it seems like when we did this whole transfer, did all this building and all this other stuff, it seemed to be, to me, like what the school district wanted, the school district got, and sometime it cost us money to make them happy. And it, like you said, this tower didn't show up the day they took ownership of that property. It had been there, and they took ownership of this tower. They assumed all the lease agreements, and all of a sudden it isn't working out to their, to my opinion, it isn't working out to their advantage, and now they want to stiff the city with paying to have it moved, when in fact
it became theirs when they took ownership of the property.
Let me jump in here. First of all, they're not trying to stiff us with anything. We had conversations between the school district leadership and the city leadership, which is me and the city administrator, about how we can do the best for our community. One of the things that's best for the community is to have one tower versus two. The superintendent worked with us. We've had at least one individual meeting and I think a couple joint meetings about how we could make this work. They're not looking to stiff us with anything. They're trying to make their building be the best building it can be, and we're trying to do the best for the city as a whole. There's a risk to everything, obviously. But in the end, if the tower's moved and it's moved to our monopole and we have a lease agreement with Verizon, it is a revenue producer which we used to enjoy when we had that property. We're restoring that, and unless cell phones are disappearing in the next 5 years, which I don't think they're going to do, I think there'll actually be more. I think this is an agreement that can actually get some of that revenue back. Sure, there are things still to be worked out. This is a difficult agreement because it's got Verizon involved and they have all the power. They have a standing lease agreement that gives them lots of control over the situation. But the situation between the school district and the city is not adversarial at all. It's actually, I think it's a good partnership. And it's one that I think this agreement would solidify, and that's why I support it. Now, how we come to the final terms, that has to be figured out. But if we don't give them some indication that we're willing to move forward on this, then essentially we're going to end up with two towers in the city, one in a very undesirable location. Just the reality of it. Just because the decisions are hard and sometimes there's a few unknowns doesn't mean you still don't go forward on them. You have to weigh the pros and cons, and that's what we're doing. But at least for this stage of the discussion, we should be able to move forward some sort of an agreement that says, let's see what happens in the next 2 weeks. We'll give them a favorable, yes, we're looking at this, and then the final terms we can nail down on the 4th of April. Then if it doesn't work out, they know what they have to do. We know that we're not going to be part of that discussion, and we move on. So to me, the best thing is to, again, find an agreement, whatever we can come to terms with tonight that says we are willing in principle to move forward on this with final terms to be negotiated on April 4th.
Mayor, if I can jump in here.
Go ahead.
I think just to reflect, I'm not sure you guys can say otherwise. I think the swallowing the nut of the $64,000 relocation cost is probably a little bit of a hurdle for us. So I think that's a point that could probably be a little worked on here as we move forward. I think that's asking a lot, to be perfectly honest. I think, we're willing to work as cooperative partners here, but I think that's an ask that may not be useful.
Does the 250,000 number get us going forward?
We think it does based on estimates for the cost, and we think that it gives some confidence to Verizon because the number, it's escrowed up in front, they know it's out there.
I mean, if we can work with the 250, that makes things a little more palatable because our break-even point is better.
Set the term at 250 to be, and then final terms to be discussed at April 4th.
250 sounds optimistic, to be perfectly honest, but I don't know.
Alderman Toman.
Is the removal of this pole, this 64,000, is that driven by the location of the auditorium at all?
I think it's driven by the school building plans, and I think the auditorium does impact that.
Okay, well, then some of the comments that have been made are actually pretty accurate because the auditorium was an addition, driven. Actually, it was overlooked by the school district, in my opinion, because the referendum did not pass. The school board district decided to move forward on that. I've got a real problem with the 64,000. I think the city has already demonstrated an ability of a willingness to work with the school district by the removal of that foundation. We paid for that. And I think we've shown due diligence as far as that goes. I don't like this $64,000 figure. Actually, where did that come from? I don't recall seeing that. Did that number go up, the removal?
That 64,000 came as a request from the district in our discussions.
But that wasn't the original cost, was it?
Jerry, the number we were talking about is a mid-30 number, I think was circulating in previous discussions. Maybe that's where the confusion is.
So how do we get from 30 to 64?
Yeah, I don't recall that. I'd have to take a look at
I
that.
don't remember seeing 64 at all. I think the school district needs to step up, at least in that capacity.
Other questions or comments? If we come up with some language that includes 250 but not 64, we have a,
We need to include flexibility on the housing.
And what I would point out with that is that those costs wouldn't be all allocated to
Yeah.
this tenant. We've obviously got two other tenants that we would spread those costs over, so it's not attributable to this. And quite honestly, we'd rather do that so that it gets done the way we want it done as opposed.
some of
to
that's
the-
our call.
Yeah, that's our
And it's
call.
not singular, as you said.
That's correct. We just have to make sure that it meets their requirements for housing the equipment that's at the bottom of the tower.
You know, Bridget's prepared, I don't know, some of the, you know, the payoff scenarios for the revolving loan fund, and so those are interesting if you overly short on what you want to look at in terms of cash flow. So do we anticipate, Bridget, from a funding standpoint, this is, if we do less than 10 years on funding, this is coming out of general fund, or?
My proposal would be that we would take the difference between the revenue that we received in each year, and the difference would need to be funded through the $1 million cash that we allocate through the CIP program. That would be my recommendation. So, and again, what you're looking in front of you, what I handed out earlier was based on the $415,000 number. Given the conversation tonight, I would say we probably could reduce that and do just the 250 through the state trust fund, and work that process. But the state equals out your payments each year. So the line that says annual payments, that's what we would be looking to fund, whichever bracket. I would recommend the 5 years. I feel like we have less risk by looking at the 5 years, given the potential terms of the lease agreement. And so whatever difference would be between the revenue and the debt payment, I would look to fund out of that $1 million cash. Similar to how
We're talking potentially $20,000, $25,000 funding gap there per year for 5 years, if we worked with the 5-year repayment schedule. If you're using a $250,000 cost.
correct.
Alderman Gale, are you comfortable putting some language together for a motion?
Melissa, what do you think the school district legally would need to have us cost up to? Cost not to exceed, and I'm particularly worried about that initial term. I don't know if there's any flexibility from Verizon standpoint on that, but I think that's.
We're certainly trying to negotiate all terms. To be fair, with an eye towards getting this done under the financial parameters that you may or may not set forth tonight for us, but then also under the time frame. I can only stress that what the other piece, not to go far afield, but the fact of it is, we've shared information that we have, and Jerry alluded to this as it relates to any environmental site assessment or work that had been done regarding the site prior to the construction of the monopole at Fire Station 1. And as it relates to that, Verizon has its site assessment, categorize it that way, so that lead time, they have indicated they will need time to do their due diligence. So point being, there are a couple of pieces, and I guess my suggestion would be to try to, any motion, if it were to go that way, would be to authorize the city administrator and city attorney to negotiate a lease agreement with PrimeCo Personal Communications Limited Partnership, which is Verizon Wireless, for placement of communications antenna facilities on a city-owned monopole located at 255 East Centennial Drive in an amount not to exceed.
I'll say, I'm comfortable working at 375.
Keep in mind, you make a motion that's higher than the 250 that we just talked about, you have a chance of that motion not succeeding.
Well, we're talking all-in costs, aren't we?
I think you can do.
There's a lot of unknown
I think
costs here.
I think the building can be done separately, because I think once we do the design for the building and bring that back to you, I think that won't be part of this lease. I think that will be, we would hope to put language in this lease that would say building to be installed by the city. So at the time we have that, that would be a motion by the council to move forward on that.
I agree with that because the motion is as it relates to any lease terms with Verizon.
So you're just talking the Verizon impact, not the school district cost share?
That's up to the council.
I get the impression the council's not really enthused about picking up the tab for
Make a motion with the number you're comfortable with, and
I think to give you a little flexibility, let's, 250 is your working number, 275 to give you a little bit of flexibility to negotiate.
want to make that motion?
Clarify.
Melissa stated it.
Go ahead.
Can I just clarify then, is it, Alderman Gale, that is for the equipment, the placement of the communications antenna facilities at the new monopole location
Only.
only? And is,
The structure and school district item, I think, can be dealt with separately.
It's still a cost.
it would be outside of the lease agreement with Verizon, but I know it's part and parcel of this discussion, so. Point being, it would not need to be a part of your motion.
Why don't you suggest the language for Alderman Gale, and he can note it if he agrees.
A motion authorizing the city administrator and city attorney to negotiate the terms of a lease agreement with Primeco Personal Communications Limited Partnership, Verizon Wireless, for placement of communications antenna facilities on a city-owned monopole located at 255 East Centennial Drive in an amount not to exceed
75?
$275,000.
What you said, Alderman Gale?
That's what I said earlier.
Got to clarify the amount so the motion can go
Yeah,
forward.
275.
Do we have a second?
And just clarification on that, and excluding any payment to the school district, is that part of the motion as well? In the lease
Yes, and
agreement?
the- and the-
That's not to say that you couldn't deal with that separately.
You need language about that we're going to continue to negotiate, or was that included?
Included.
Okay, good. All right, do I have a second on that motion?
Tolman will second.
Tolman seconds, roll call.
Alderman Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
No.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Abstain.
Tolman.
Aye.
All right, some progress. Thanks, gentlemen. All right, moving to item 13, it's a motion to approve the 2016 vendor summary report in the amount of $1,106,664.71. City Finance Director is here to answer any questions. Any questions for Bridget?
Bridget, sorry, I did have one. The 165 for Gunderson, is that part of the original contract, or Mike? Or is that the subsequent?
That was the payment
change?
approved at the last common council meeting, correct?
That is correct. The only monies retained is about $3,400 retainage, and that would be paid out when the project is approved, probably at the next meeting. We just need some closeout paperwork signed by the contractor.
So this was for the additional work that he found in the footings when he was in the ground, correct?
Correct.
And on item number 9, Oak Creek Commerce Development is who? Remember?
This is in TIF 4. Prior to closeout, there was a developer agreement with the city and Oak Creek Commerce relating to debt payments and money sharing between us and this developer. And this payment is due based on attorney review prior to the close of the district, which is upcoming at the next common council meeting.
City Administrator.
I think it's important to note that early on in its existence, TID 4 was having cash flow issues, and this was part of what was needed for the cash flow issues on that. I think we can happily report that, as Bridget indicated, we're going to be closing this out at the next meeting. It's getting closed out early, and it's got a good cash flow that's coming in now. But I think we've learned over the years how to negotiate very good payments and find out and allocate dollars if there's a shortage. And this was a developer contribution that came in early on, that should there be adequate income before we close it out, it gets paid back to them. So that's what you got, $109,000 for that.
I just have a question.
Go ahead.
Item 14, I get a little skittish with the whole communication tower stuff now.
This is actually a part, or was a part of our 2015 capital improvement program, project number 15006. We budgeted $200,000 for this. This is the tower, our tower, that is at Fire Station 1.
Thanks, guys.
Any other questions?
Just one.
Go ahead.
17, it's a small item, but monitoring groundwater Veolia for about 5,000. Is this an ongoing cost, or was this a one-time shot? Does that has something to do with the site here?
This is ongoing monitoring, I believe, for the BMPs.
Yeah, as part of the city received $750,000 from MMSD to implement what are called BMPs, Best Management Practices for Stormwater Management at Drexel Town Square. As part of that program, we had a variety of rain gardens, we have porous pavers, we have shared detention areas that are in the park and wetland areas out there. As part of that process, we are working closely with MMSD to be able to monitor all of the rain flows and storm events that come here. So we're actually kind of on a cutting edge to see what really works, what are the ratios, so that we can prove out whether in fact these are operating as they were programmed. So there's an ongoing cost for putting them. This is some of the equipment, and then there's a much less cost on a monthly basis in terms of the communications equipment that's needed. But this is some of the monitoring equipment. And I believe we've got 2 or 3 points, I don't remember exactly, throughout the development where the monitoring is actually taking place. So we're testing what those stormwater flows are.
Did they put a timetable on here associated with the grant, like 10 years, kind of like we did with the
There is. We've got an ongoing reporting requirement. I think it's 3 to 5 years, something along that line. Three is what Bridget's saying. Sue's given us the signal. It's 3 years.
Sue says that it's right.
Yeah. So there is kind of that ongoing monitoring. And, I think it's really interesting because we're really on the kind of the front end on some of these things, and they want to be able to prove out to folks who they report to in the general public what really works. Sometimes the theory and the practice doesn't align, so that we're helping out with that, and it's going to be an interesting project for us.
Don't disagree. I mean, it's a good story the way it came together with this particular site with stormwater and how the park came about.
And it was fairly tough to identify these monitoring places. We actually spent a long time with our engineering staff, stormwater staff, and Graves to try to figure this out, because this has not been done before. So it took a little bit to figure it out.
It sounds like it's going to get a good test tonight and tomorrow. Maybe it's first, well, no, we had a big rainfall last week. All right, any other questions on the vendor summary report? Motion.
Bill move to approve the 2016 vendor summary report in the amount of $1,106,664.71.
Kuzikowski will second.
Roll call.
Alderman Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Aye.
Tobin.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
You can continue, but I have to excuse myself for a minute.
No problem. Item 14 under Water and Sewer is a consideration of resolution number 11687-031516, a preliminary resolution declaring intent to exercise special assessment powers under section 3.200 of the municipal code for the installation of water main in South 15th Avenue from 50 feet north of East Woodview Avenue to 1,100 feet north of East Woodview Avenue, and to establish a public hearing date for April 4th, 2016, which is my wife's birthday. 3rd and 4th District. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Ron Pritzloff, Oak Creek Water and Sewer Utility. The Utility Commission has seen fit to recommend this water main extension project to the council and consequently the intent to special assess resolution. The project itself consists of approximately the installation of 1,100 feet of water main in 15th Avenue. 15th Avenue does border the 3rd and 4th districts, so that would affect 7 parcels in the 3rd and 7 parcels in the 4th. There's 10-year paybacks and 20-year paybacks based on city ordinance. Those range respectively from $7,700 to $13,200 and from $8,500 to $22,300. So that assessment includes the linear footage of water main fronting the property as well as the lateral to the right-of-way line. And the graphic up here in red, it does show where that line runs, essentially from Woodview Avenue north, approximately 1,100 feet.
Questions? Seeing none. Oh, Alderman Tallman.
I met out on site there on site with Ron today, and there's also this was actually generated by the water main break was that last fall?
Yeah, it has its roots in January. We had a water main break on Ryan Road, and it took out that entire Northbrook subdivision, approximately 175 residents. I believe that the commission's notion was that to number one, to get a second feed to that subdivision, and what's the best way to do that from a water quality, water supply standpoint. So option one was obviously this 1,100-foot extension that I'm proposing. There is a backup plan. If you look on the map that I provided, where East Kender Lane loops into that triangular piece, we can extend water main through there and north along Carrollton Drive and through that subdivision. That would also provide a second feed. That would affect no properties. However, from a water supply and water quality standpoint, it's obviously the second best option.
What is the downside to the alternative?
The downside is that if we run the water down 15th Avenue, we've got larger piping, we've got better flow, we've got better and resulting better water quality feeding that subdivision as the water loops from the north and easterly along Ryan Road. The pipes gradually get bigger. If it's coming through that subdivision to the north through Carrollton, actually there's some restriction to the flow through various 8-inch pipes. Then it's going to have to come back up to a short piece of 12-inch pipe through that right-of-way zone there. And so you're not going to have as good a flow and resulting water quality. Still works.
I think this is a good example of listening to the public. That's where I'm leading. Mark's gotten any comments?
Yeah, I've had one or two conversations with some people on the road there, and some of them have reservations as to why we're doing this, and is the need there because of somebody else, or is it just for the people on 15th Avenue? And everyone here knows that it's not for the people on 15th Avenue. It's to help out the other residents there as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion when the public hearing comes up.
I agree with you. Thanks, Ron.
Anything else? Motion on 14.
Someone will make a motion to
Thanks,
adopt.
Ron. Go ahead.
Someone makes a motion to adopt resolution number 11687, resolution declaring intent to exercise special assessment powers for the installation of water main in South 15th Avenue from 50 feet north of East Woodview Avenue to 1,100 feet north of East Woodview Avenue, and to establish a public hearing date for April 4th, 2016.
Rail, second.
Roll call.
Alderman Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Aye.
Tillman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye. Under engineering, item 15 is a motion to reject the bids for the Lake Vista Park project and to direct staff to redesign and advertise a phased park project that works within the budget. Project numbers 14036 and 14037 in the 4th District. Mike Simmons, city engineer.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll give a real quick overview of how the park was authorized and came to be designed and out for bid, and some of the challenges that we faced in the design process and how the bids came out. So basically, the lakefront. This was one of the actually a couple of the projects that were authorized back in October of 2014 by the council as a multi-phase lakefront improvement plan. Later on that year, December of 2014, was the first of a couple of public informational meetings in which public input was sought on what this park, what some of the amenities this park could be and should be. What are the needs? That was followed by a volunteer committee that further shaped the plan into a concept plan that was approved by the Common Council. City worked with Smith Group JJR on the proceeding onto the design, which included many unique features that you would not see in some of the other city parks. As the design developed and estimates were investigated, caused some budgetary concerns. Staff reviewed that with the group, and some of the cost-saving measures that were instituted were taking out some of the work that could be achieved by city streets and parks staff. That amounted to about $325,000 that needed to be reserved in the budget to take care of that. Another step was to evaluate all of the unique features of the park, and it was thought because of the bumping up against the budget, some of these items should be structured in the bid as an alternate. And the thought being that as these bids come in, there could be a base bid that could be approved, and then the council could pick and choose some of their preferred options on some of the alternates on these features. Basically, though, 5 bids were received. They were higher than expected, and I've got that outlined for you in the attachment to the bids. Basically, what we were seeing as we evaluated the bids after they came in, there was really only one bidder that was even close to being in the ballpark of the budget. And so we looked at that bid, and the determination was that the one item, the pavilion, came in about twice as high as the estimates. And all of the alternates, when you combine them, were almost 2.5 times the estimate. So the really only item, the only consideration that was talked about was, should there be a recommendation to award the base bid work only? And as it turns out, that's too close to the budgetary number. When you add in the $325,000 that was reserved for the city work, we were over budget. Compounding that was some uncertainty on some of the other lakefront projects that we don't have clear answers on some of those funding reserves. And it did not leave us any contingency on this construction. And we think that this project, because of the unique features, because of the soils conditions that we're dealing with out there, we need to have some contingency fund built in. All of that combined basically led us to our recommendation to reject the bids and then basically regroup and figure out how to redesign and get something rebid out there.
So for the public, with the work that was done last year and the roadway work on Highway 100 extension to that area, what would that look like this summer now that we're going back to the drawing board essentially on this? What's that going to look like?
Well, yeah, this summer, the Fifth Avenue Extension Project, that's a bid letting of April 12th, so.
With work to be completed this year?
With work to be completed this year,
And
so.
the roadway and trails are in already?
Well, the Fifth Avenue project, that's the extension from Chicago and Highway 100
Right,
to
I know that.
Ryan and Fifth.
I'm talking about
That's
this
going to be
property.
constructed this year. Yes, on this property, the road has been constructed, and basically the trail that parallels the road is in. So this project had many more trails that were interconnecting and many other features.
So right now, given what's, not talking about the extension, but just the work that was done last year on this park, it would be naturalizing. We'd have a roadway, we'd have one trail, essentially like a 12-foot wide trail that goes through the property. And then we start over on this rebidding process for the rest of it. Yep.
That's the recommendation, yes.
Okay, city administrator.
Just to make a point on Mike's description, which I think is a good one. A few too many moving parts here, given the closeness of the budget. The primary one being Fifth Street Extension. As Mike indicated, that bid opening is on April 12th. That's a project that we're going to need to award. That's a project that the state is going out to bid with. We've got 2 bridges that are part of that bid letting as well. If you remember, we took down some trees for both a long-eared and short-eared bat a couple weeks ago. And that's really a project that needs to move forward. So I want that variable in the equation out so that, we know what we have left for this project. It could be we get very favorable bids and there's a few dollars left, but it could work the other way. And if it does, we're going to need to adjust where we're at. We've got some uncertainty on our North Bluff area and one of the grants that we have out there. We're working that through the DNR. So I've got more variables than I expected to have at this time. And I just don't think it's prudent, with as close as we are to that, to move forward. We did meet with the engineers and the designers. We think there's some pretty significant changes we can do that aren't going to affect the value of this. There's been some change in the DNR in terms of how we deal with soil. There is going to be 88,000 yards of soil on this site. We're rethinking that as part of the earth forms. So we'll review that with the council in detail when we bring this back. We're expecting to bring this back second meeting in April, after we've had the bids in on Fifth Street Extension, so we know where we're at on that. And we expect to then be able to put this out very quickly, because essentially the package just has to get repackaged. We're thinking, because of the doubling of the building structures, the excavators that bid on this project really didn't understand the building construction. They put a significant increase, and we think we're probably going to do that as a separate bid, and we may do that as a 2-phase. We may do the park issues this year, get that all done so we don't have 2 generals and conflicting with each other, and then maybe into 17 do the building and the structures, so that we can get different groups that are better set to bid on those.
Do you see the timeline for the park project? If rebid, we could actually get some of those park amenities done this year, and then the building would actually be next year.
That would be the plan. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We think that can still get done this year, and then we take the structures and we put them out next year.
Come on up, Mr. Degner.
Arden Degner, 8540 South Pennsylvania Avenue. It's interesting. Is the public going to be able to have any access? Essentially, all you need is that road going through it, in and out. Will that be ungated so that it can be used over the summer? Because I'm afraid if you reject everything, that's going to be all closed up so that it will be of no use. Actually, it's probably cost less to maintain the park without the buildings.
The answer is yes. The road can be opened up. We've got fences at both ends of that so that we can close it. And the discussion was to not have the public in there during construction. Obviously, construction isn't taking place right now. We could open it up.
Fine, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Degner. Other questions?
I've got a question.
Go ahead, Alderman Verhaelen.
Just looking at the large cost of this project, and I realize this thing is going to be one of our showcase parks at the end of the day, but I was thinking along the line of possibly with some of the savings we get on some of these other projects, and moving forward as well, possibly creating a sinking fund to, help finance this thing in more of a phased type thing like we did with Abendscheid Park, rather than trying to get this thing done in a tight timeline and tying funds up where we could probably use it for road repairs and other things in the next coming years. But just a thought.
We already have the debt floated on this, Mark. I mean, we have the budgeted amount is available. So, the 5.5, minus less the design cost is available. So it isn't like Auburndshine where we're doing park impact fees to do that. So a little different situation here.
All right, go ahead, Mark.
Well, the reason I brought it up is because the way it looks, we're probably going to be quite a bit over what's budgeted. That's why I suggested, phasing this thing in. And I realize that was talked a little bit. Jerry just mentioned the same thing, but if there'd be any way we could put money into a sinking fund to possibly mitigate writing a check for whatever we have to finish at the end of the day. It's just a suggestion, but, I hate to see us put all kinds of facilities down there, because I'd like to see this based more on how the area develops as well. I hate to see us put millions of dollars of investment down there and not really being utilized because there's no imminent development. So I don't know if there's any chance of basing some of the structures and some of the more expensive things down there being based on what developments are going to come in there and the timing on that. We have to all realize here also that that's kind of a less traveled area of the city of Oak Creek. And I hate to see us spend a lot of money down there putting nice showcase facilities down there and having them being subject to vandalism and whatnot because there's not enough pedestrian traffic and other things going on down there, and it leaves it wide open for kids having parties and all kinds of things. And all of a sudden we've got the police department having trouble keeping patrols down there, and streets department, taking care of graffiti and, windows being broken on buildings and all kinds of other stuff like that. That's why I'm kind of reluctant to put all that money down there when, this stuff could very, very well happen, and has a good chance of it, because kids are kids. All of us were kids one time too, and, especially teenagers, they'll look for a handy place to have beer parties and all kinds of other things, and I'd hate to see us put all kinds of money down there and have it be a problematic thing until, development does come down there. That's why I'd like to see this thing, timed more to see what we get for, whether it's upscale apartments or different types of housing or something where there's more people access down there, so we don't have to worry about stuff like that.
I hear what you're saying about phasing. I think there's a place for that. The one thing I'm not going to be in favor of is delaying access to this area. This area's been closed off for 80-some years to the public, to the point where the public doesn't even realize what's down there. And if they ever got down there, beautiful Bender Park, but the top of the bluffs is a view and that's why we call it Lake Vista, that's worth seeing. So I'm not going to do anything that keeps that closed for another year or 2 years. So yes, we have to phase this because we don't have the budget dollars, it sounds like, to do the vision that we have, but we can certainly move forward with something, which I think is what you're suggesting. Go ahead.
Several points. There is a path forward. Again, depending on where the reworked bids come in, we think we're going to be able to pick up more of the alternates when we rework that. We are planning to create a donor and donee TIF district where we're generating about $500,000 a year in increment that can go forward to do some improvements in Bender Park and some improvements here. So there's a ready cash pot, if you will, available from a TIF district for that. The other point is the one with the private development that you mentioned. We spent a fair amount of time, city attorney, myself, former city attorney, and then with development individuals in Menominee Valley in the city of Milwaukee, talking about how best to roll out some of the private development opportunities on this site. And we're going to be bringing to the council a little bit later this year what we recommend is going to be an RFP for the entire site to see if we can't get development proposals for the entire site. We looked about creating an authority like the Menominee Valley Authority, and we didn't think that was really a very good idea. We think we can put this out there and get some of that activity that the alderman has spoken about, because I do think that's an issue down at this site. We want to activate the area as quick as we can. We certainly want to put it in our new newsletter so that the out-of-the-way park becomes a park that people experience. We want to do some fun things with that so people get out and about in the community for that. So I think we have some answers for that we'll be bringing to the council in terms of that development process. And we're also looking at TIF District 6, which is generating in excess of $500,000 a year and has satisfied all of its requirements of being a donor TIF district. And I won't get into all the particulars here, to this lakefront that starts to create cash to complete the project. So there's a way forward in a relatively short term if we don't have the entire budget to do this. I think the community that was involved in this and in establishing this, and the staff, I think is really committed, really would like to see many of the amenities that are out there. The budget just doesn't create that right now, but I think we can get that again a little bit in a phase basis, probably within a 3 to 4 year period.
Alderman Kirkowski.
I agree that the road needs to be open. I think that's a great idea. And I think this goes without saying, Jerry and Mike, that prior to doing that, you get with traffic and safety and make sure all the parking, no parking, speed limits and stuff is in place so that the public knows what's going on there before you open it up.
The geese have found it.
Yeah. So the staff direction is to reject the bids. Do we have a motion for that? Oh, Alderman Tolman has a comment.
Comment here yet. When we go back and try and tweak this whole scenario here, do we go back to all 5 of the bidders, or can we pick? I mean, because there's a big spread here between these 5 bids that came in. Can we target bidder E and deal strictly with bidder E, or do we need? Because I mean, we're so far off on these other ones. Are we wasting our time here?
No, a couple things. We'd go out to all of the bidders. We think a little bit of redesign in the materials and things like that, and maybe a better understanding. Again, these are primarily excavators that we're building on structures, and they were putting in what we've realized is they've been putting in some pretty significant increases. I'll give you an analogy. Remember the shade structures that we had in the original bids that we did at Drexel Town Square here? They came in at, and I'm somewhat doing this from memory, about $85,000. We ended up going to a contractor that understood what they were. We awarded those outside of that for, I think, $34,000. So it tells you the difference when you get a different contractor in there, and we think these are building contractors as opposed to excavators, and that's the way we're going to line up the bids.
My biggest concern, why I brought it up, is that we are very close on the base bid on bidder E.
Yep.
Okay, so if we delay this too long, I'm in favor of going forward with base bid E within the budget. Okay, I think that number can be tweaked. We can get very close to it. So I'd like to see us go forward on the base bid, but I don't want to see it 6 months or a year from now. I'd like to see it. I think you indicated sometime in April we can have something to look at.
Second meeting we'd be at. And the point that you're making is one that we beat around considerably from a staff basis, and we were really torn because we had the low base bid. You've got a 1.2 difference between there and the million on the next bid. Do you leave dollars on the table? And we felt that if we could have made some change orders in that base bid, primarily with the buildings and so forth, we can go forward with them. That's really not an appropriate way to do that, and we couldn't find a way forward to do that. So we had discussions internally. We had them with the city attorney, and just exactly the point that you're making, we debated that pretty hard and ended up where we are tonight. But there could be differences of opinion in that.
Jerry, just for our $5 million cost for this project assumed base bid plus all the alternates were done.
It did. At least the construction estimates, the instructions, the marching orders to our designers were, we had essentially a $5.5 million bid. We had about $500,000 in design costs and engineering costs. So we had 5 left. That was assuming we were going to be able to get there.
If you just want to, you get basically flat land and no features.
Yep. Okay, other questions? What do you want to do? Make a motion?
I'll make the motion, but I'll reiterate what I said. I'd like to see something in April. The rest of the council wants to see this.
See something done this year.
There's a heck of an interest in that lakefront. I get it every day. And the fact that we had to gate that thing, the public really they want to be down there. It's evident. So I'll make the motion, Tillman will make a motion to reject the bids for Lake Vista Park project and to direct staff to redesign and advertise a phased park project that works within the budget.
Kirkowski will second.
Kirkowski seconds.
You got the project.
Roll call.
Alderman Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Aye.
Tillman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
Under Streets, Parks, and Forestry ordinance, it's a discussion of ordinance or a motion to concur with the Personnel Committee recommendation for a Streets, Parks, and Forestry reorg and adopt ordinance number 2795, amending section 5 of ordinance number 2788, fixing the salary ranges, salary wages, and allowances for non-union general and management personnel and other city offices and positions for 2016. Welcome.
Yeah, actually, this kind of stems back to a program that we've been working pretty closely with the Personnel Committee. If you guys are all familiar, Streets, Parks, and Forestry at one time had a step raise program that is no longer in existence. We basically don't have anything right now that would allow our employees to advance. And so rather than having an attrition-based system like the old step raise system, we worked very closely with the Personnel Committee to develop a skill-based path forward, which our reorganization and the adoption of the new salary ordinance would allow us to basically put in a three-tier system. It would start out an employee starting at our starting base wage, which is $17.37 an hour, and it would basically the employee would have to pass a number of skill tests in order for them to be able to advance to the next tier of the system, which would be the laborer driver to the operator 1 to the operator 2. Currently, we have 14 people that would be in the operator 2 spot. What we're proposing this program be when it is completely rolled out would be limit the number of people in these classifications to what is shown on this table, which would be 8 equipment operator 2s, 8 operator 1s, and then 10 laborer drivers, which is a total of 26 employees that we have, our base kind of workers. That doesn't include office staff or mechanics or management personnel. But what that will do is we'll have the employees have to pass certain levels. A number of these, and there's a list in the document that was attached to this of what they need to take in order to move up or be considered to move up to the next level. Once a spot is available, we would have a group of their peers do an evaluation and basically vote, and the person that was the most qualified would move up into the next range, as opposed to just attrition like it was before. So a number of these programs and classification tests that they would have to take were kind of given to us through CIVMEC, and a number of them that CIVMEC didn't have, we created our own for pieces of equipment that the city owns that maybe a lot of others don't. For instance, our tub grinder, things like that. So we think this is a really good program. We started this out working with the Personnel Committee in 2015. We've gone through a number of iterations on this. We felt we've got a lot of good feedback from the Personnel Committee, up to the point where they finally felt comfortable enough to allow us to bring this to the rest of the Common Council and ask that you approve us going through with this reorganization and adoption of the new ordinance amending the salary.
Thank you, Ted. Questions?
I have one. It might
Alderman
turn,
Kirkowski.
it might turn into two, I think. Ted, what caught my attention is you were talking about voting as to whether or not an individual would go, say, from laborer driver up to equipment operator 1.
That would be if there was multiple candidates.
Okay.
That, so it wouldn't just be based on the individual start date. It would be based on their skill level, and a group of their peers would actually be the ones that would help make a decision on who they felt was the most qualified candidate. We want to try to keep away from, having the employees feel it's the kind of the good old boys club or something like that. So it would have a little bit more meaning when.
Perhaps I'm reading too much into it, but do you feel you could overcome any perceived or personality conflicts that individuals may have with an applicant for a higher position? He's well qualified. I mean, he knows his job. He does very well, but this one particular employee doesn't really care for him for whatever silly reason it might be, so he's not going to vote for him. You see what I'm trying to say?
No, I understand exactly what you're trying to say. That's one of the reasons myself and Ralph would be on the committee, as well as a number of individuals. We anticipated probably about 5 individuals in addition to myself and Ralph but sure, you're always going to have some personality conflicts, but I would certainly hope, though, with a number of individuals, we could kind of overcome that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Just have one.
Alderman Guzekowski.
We always talk about the streets, parks, and forestry. Have we ever thought about calling ourselves that Department of Public Works, or?
I've thought about that numerous times.
You don't like saying street, parks, and forestry?
Not always, but I'm just saying, would it be better, but would it be better descriptive, because it is Public Works. I mean, when you look at the totality of what they do. You compare ourselves to our neighboring communities.
We don't want to be like our neighboring community. We want to be different.
We are.
That's good.
We're unique.
Ted,
Well, then keep the name the same.
Becky.
It's slightly off topic, but don't feel that my comment was a rejection of what you offered.
No.
It's not intended that way. I get what you're saying.
Yep.
Alderman Gale.
I don't remember. Do we? Which is not a
Hurt
surprise.
feelings.
When is this going to be effective, Ted? When are we going to start this? Sorry.
You know what, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I would have to go back to the Personnel Committee meeting minutes, and there is a specific date that.
I thought so.
I believe it was.
Becky's back there waving her hand.
Oh.
It is?
Very good.
That's the voice of our HR director.
Oh, there you go. Sorry. Yep, 6 or 9 says. Great. So some employees will see some wage adjustments retroactively.
So nothing but seashells and balloons from the employees at Street Parks and Forestry?
Hey, we live a charmed life.
City Administrator.
And I think I would point out, Ted mentioned this, but I think there was healthy debate, 3 or 4 different sessions on the part of the Personnel Committee to get to a point that everybody felt comfortable with. So I think Ted revised some of his proposals over time to address some of the concerns that were out there. And I think, and again, the committee members can speak, but I think that it got to a point where everyone felt comfortable with this. Employees were somewhat involved, but it's really difficult to get employees involved in a program that hasn't been adopted because they can have a false sense of what might go on, have a recollection that's not exactly how things got adopted. So that's always a tough thing. But Ted had some of his employees at some of the committee meetings as well. So I think this got vetted pretty well and is working towards, you know, a unit. We can at least say those things in one word as opposed to the separation that we've had. It allows a little bit more, they're all departmental employees, so Ted can assign the folks where he needs them.
Anything else?
I guess I'll just weigh in. I was on personnel and I kind of went round and round with this. I think it's a step in the right direction in some sort. I also think it's limiting. It does create some ceilings, and I think you will have some retention problems in the long run with some of these positions.
That being said, we did wrestle with this a long time, and I think one thing all three of us agreed on personnel was that there was no perfect system. And the previous system would have been the easiest for the city just to roll along with what we had with the step system, but we were not in favor with it. I mean, there's less work involved in that if you just advance people with seniority. But now we're looking at skill levels. I think ultimately this will work.
Totally agree. If no other questions, motion on 18.
Tobin will make a motion to adopt ordinance number 2795, amending section 5 of ordinance 2788 and fixing the salary ranges, salary, wages, and allowances for non-union, general, management personnel, and other city offices and positions for the year 2016.
Gale, second.
Roll call.
Alderman Verhaelen.
Aye.
Toman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
Licensing, number 19.
Mr. Mayor, would you want to jump ahead to item 24 before we
Certainly.
go to the exciting licensing committee?
Sure.
stuff?
Item 24 is a motion to authorize the city administrator to sign the City of Oak Creek agreement for research with Cobalt Community Research in the amount of $13,825. City administrator.
So what the council has in front of you is a recommendation to go out and perform a community survey. We last did this in 2011. The survey was sent to 1,500 people at that time that were selected off the registered voters list in a random drawing. Approximately $4,500 of this cost is the direct printing and mailing cost, as well as having an in-person presentation. I think the mayor and Mike were here then. We tried to do a teleconferencing last time, and it didn't work very well, quite honestly, and translate very well. So there's an additional $1,500 in for that we didn't have last time, which makes some sense for that. We did get, I think, good feedback from the community. And one of those pieces of feedback was that it actually was okay to move City Hall, provided there wasn't a tax increase. That somewhat different than a resident who spoke earlier today in terms of their recollection of what that said, but that's what the survey said. There's some pretty powerful information in that. If some of you remember the text clouds, particularly the roads that needed to be replaced, remember which road had the largest text cloud in it by far? Nothing was close. 13th, you got it. We had input in terms of businesses that should be in town, and I think we've been able to track some of those, and I think we're working on others. So I think we've got some very good feedback. At the point of discussion for the budget, we had $40,000 in between the survey and also community strategic planning. It's felt that this information is needed to basically feed into that strategic planning session. What we're trying to do is get this survey out on April 30th so that we can have those results and start doing the strategic planning in July. That's going to be everything from looking at increased staffing in the police and fire departments, elsewhere, trying to get a feel for the community in terms of some dollar questions. We have a lot of the same questions in this survey that were in the first one in order to gauge if we've made any progress or if we've actually lost ground in some areas. That's an important part of the survey, is to be able to have your baseline to find out where you're going to be over time. So that's the reason we've got Cobalt recommended here. And again, you've got about $8,000 for the actual survey itself. The other $5,000 is for the actual cost and the presentations here. So we've made some adjustments. We have some of the same fill-in columns. We think that those have to be tabulated individually and entered, so there's a cost to those. We think, 4 pretty interesting questions. We've kept the same one: which streets are in need of maintenance or repair. We've got a question in there, find it, of, in your opinion, what are the two most important issues facing the city of Oak Creek? I think that's going to be a very interesting response in terms of how that is changed, if at all, from the last questionnaire. Can you if you can imagine Oak Creek in the next 10 years, what do you want it to be known for? And there's a 4th question in here, and I just can't pin it really quickly. We have some housing questions that we didn't have before. There's some general organization questions that are in here that weren't before. We took out a lot of the questions about combination of services, working with other communities. We made some generic comments about that to try to identify where we are today as opposed to where we were in 2011. I had a group of staff members that helped me get through this, along with researchers at Cobalt, and I think we're pretty happy with this. As we did last time, there were some council revisions, questions about it, and I think we're here to take that input.
Questions?
Comments? Alderman Kirkowski.
Jerry, I had a chance to talk with Ann. She's here present in case we have any questions regarding 2 matters regarding or relative to the health department. And I think she has some very good points. And what I would like to explain question number 9 with regards to the city public health department. Preventive health services and immunization services are kind of hand in hand. They're together. However, Ann has concerns that if they were combined, it may be a confusing question. Or if, for example, if they put preventive health services / immunization services. Now, I'm not requesting that, but I'd like just to understand that those two are kind of the same, but I think it's important that they be separated because the public just may not understand one from the other because it can get a little bit technical. The other is adding 2 more questions, one of them with regards to communicable disease prevention, and then environmental health / sanitation services, because those are functions that the health department does quite extensively, and I think that would be important to get some feedback on that. And then I have a question on 30, but if you want to reply to 9.
So you're looking to add those as two sub issues under 9?
Correct.
And that certainly can be done. What you want to try to avoid, because you want actionable information, you don't want to provide preventive health services and immunization services, because if you get an answer, you're not sure which of those 2 they're answering. So, you definitely want to separate those.
Yes, I'm asking to keep
Right.
them separate.
Right.
And then adding communicable disease prevention, and then environmental health / sanitation services.
We can certainly do that.
Okay. And then with regards to question 30, I know that Bridget had some input with discussions with Ann on this question. I'd like to add health department to those categories, because as the board discusses the potential for any future shared services, I think it would be important to understand that concept. Does the public, what do they think of the health department with regards to that question? So if just add health department to that.
The only response that I would have is traditionally we're looking at the city organizations as having 4 primary functions. kind of the administrative functions under which health department would be one of, the engineering department would be part of that, inspections would be part of that. And we basically have left all of those off on this because the last survey got was not unexpected. If there was areas to be cut, those services that people don't directly experience are the areas that what they would look at. So we didn't think that that made a lot of sense to do that. We're trying to focus on the police and the fire, and then either the public works or the forestry, streets and parks. Take your pick. So, I mean, we can do that, but that's the reason that that's not in that list.
I understand your, excuse me, I understand the reason, but as I said already, as we look into potential shared services, the answers just may have some small impact or some help to the board.
Now, obviously, those changes can be made. We're trying to, the one caveat that we have, we're trying to keep this within the 6 pages. Number one, we hear from the survey folks that it starts to get too long, people won't fill it out. And number two, we go to an additional mailing cost if we go beyond the 6 pages. So as long as we're within that and keep it in, we can add or take questions out.
Thank you.
Alderman Verhaelen?
Yeah, first of all, I've got just a general question to Jerry and everybody else that put their heads together to consider this. Did we ever consider possibly doing this survey in-house? And the reasons I'm asking, I'm going to kind of go down a list. First of all, we didn't have a communications director the last time we did this. Leslie is a very capable individual, I would guess, and I don't think this is beyond her scope of doing something like this along with IT. And everybody knows we put a lot of money into our new IT systems and things that our capabilities are way further ahead than what we did this the last time. Another thing is, if we were going to do this cold like we did last time, we didn't have anything to follow. We didn't know what we were doing. Now we have the last survey to look at. We've got a blueprint of the questions that want to be asked. They've been updated already by our staff. You know, I don't think it's beyond the realm of trying to do this in-house, and I think we could get it done a lot cheaper.
You want to respond to that? Comments on that?
The response is no, we really haven't considered it in-house, and I don't think we have the staff to do it. Matter of fact, I think we're pushed right now with the projects we have and are probably exceeding what our staff capacity is. We also don't have the ability to input all of these things in to be able to manipulate the dollars or the numbers and compare them to both private and public sector organizations around the country. One of the features of this particular research is they compare our results to entities in both the private and the public sector. That is certainly not data we have and we're not capable of. It lets us know in our industry how well are we performing relative to the input from our residents compared to some of our peers. We would have liked to have seen some more Wisconsin communities in this. I'm expecting when the presentation comes in, I'm expecting Brookfield and I think some other communities in this area that are considering using Cobalt to be part of the presentation. I've offered that to Cobalt to basically try to get some of those additional Wisconsin communities. I've actually made a presentation with them at a conference in terms of the research. But I don't think we have the capability to do this in-house, quite honestly.
I don't mean to interrupt, but you know, I kind of got the impression this was a gauge for what we're doing in Oak Creek, and you know, I guess if we're trying to see what progress we're making, you know, why are we comparing ourselves to Brookfield or Waukesha or anybody else? Because you know, as we stated before, Oak Creek is its own entity, and you know, I don't envision us, you know, doing this to try to keep up to the Joneses. I think we're doing this to gauge where we were 5 years ago, where we are now, where we're going in 2 or 3 or 4 more years, and I don't see where you know it's necessary to look all over the area in southeastern Wisconsin, you know, to compare ourselves to other people when, you know, that's not really what we're trying to do. We're trying to move the city forward here, and we're not concerned with, you know, we're concerned with what's going on around us, of course, but, you know, I'm kind of getting the feeling that, you know, this is more focused on what Oak Creek is doing and where Oak Creek is going.
You know, and I understand that perspective, and I think it is mostly concerned with that, but that's an added value in terms of where we are compared to peer groups in both private sector and public sector, and makes for some interesting information.
And as someone that worked in research for 28 years before I became mayor, having a company, independent company that's skilled in doing these types of things, we are not at anywhere near close to being able to do this internally. We don't have the staff for it. We don't have the database management skills to do that. There are ways that you can analyze data that we frankly wouldn't have no knowledge of or understanding. I would say that the survey we did 5 years ago was probably one of the most important things we did as a city, because it measured not only where we were at, but where we were going to go. And it resulted in a lot of things that we have, that were the building that we're in now, the parks that we're building. Those are answers that were provided by that survey. And it was 1,500 people then, and I think this one is 2,000. It's so valuable, and for the cost, you know, it's already been budgeted. It was in our budget. I think it's important that we, at least every 5 years, do a survey like this with an independent company to assess where we're at and then where we're going.
One of the pieces of information we got from Cobalt, and I think it's called SCI, which is this validated survey from both private and public industries across the state. They said if we were doing that survey alone, for most any other entity, it'd be $50,000. So we're getting that as significant value as part of this not-for-profit entity. So this is a not-for-profit as opposed to a for-profit research organization. So just a piece of information.
Did you have a question beyond that one? Nope. Okay. Other questions?
Mayor, just to comment, I think this survey is, I was a strong advocate of doing the original one. I continue to advocate that this is a important piece of our puzzle as we continue to move forward as a city to figure out where we've been, where we need to go, what citizens are looking for, and that, along with the magazine we just authorized tonight, I think are going to serve dual purposes of getting our citizenry more involved and more informed. Let them know that we just don't operate up here in a vacuum. We have create the feedback loop we've all been looking for in terms of getting the community involved and listening to what's going on out there. I think this is an important step. The survey, I think, is well put together. It'll serve us well moving forward, and I'm completely in favor of that.
Motion.
Bill move to authorize the city administrator to sign the City of Oak Creek agreement for the research with Cobalt Community Research in the amount of $13,825.
Guzekowski, second.
Roll call.
Alderman Toman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
No. Back to licensing, 19.
Okay, the License Committee did not meet prior to the meeting. Tentative recommendations are as follows. Kirkowski will make a motion to grant an operator's license to the 5 individuals listed on the agenda. Favorable background reports were received.
Gill, second.
Roll call.
Alderman Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Aye.
Toman.
Aye.
20.
Kirkowski will make a motion to grant a transient merchant license to True Green, N8W 22550 Johnson Drive, Waukesha, Wisconsin, and the 2 following salespersons listed on the agenda. Favorable background reports were received.
Gill, second.
Roll call.
Alderman Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Aye.
Toman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
And under miscellaneous, item 21 is a motion to convene into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute, Section 19.851E, to discuss a proposed letter of intent for the sale of the property at 8,000 South Market Street with the Waters Senior Living Holdings, LLC. Alderman Gale.
Gill moves to convene in the closed session pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute, Section 19.85, Sub 1, Sub E, to discuss a proposed letter of intent for the sale of property at 8,000 South Market Street with the Waters Senior Living Holdings, LLC.
Guzekowski, second.
Roll call.
Alderman Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Aye.
Toman.
Aye.
Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye.
All right, we will go into closed session, and that's that room over there. And when we are completed, we'll come back into open session and conclude the meeting.
Gill moves to reconvene in the open session.
Guzekowski, second.
Roll call.
Bekavich. Bekavich.
Aye.
Verhaelen.
Aye.
Tolman. Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
Motion to adjourn.
Kirkowski will make a motion to adjourn.
Gavich seconds.
Roll call.
Alderman Verhaelen.
Aye.
Tolman. Gale.
Aye.
Guzekowski.
Aye.
Kirkowski.
Aye.
Bekavich.
Aye.
See you next week.